Here's another short little tutorial on the XP30. Right now we're looking at the back panel of this instrument, and I'm just going to go over some of the connectors on the back. Okay, now this is an older synthesizer, circa early 2000s, late 1990s, I think. So some of the connectors on the back of this instrument are outdated. But here we see where my finger is pointing now is a memory card slot. Many synthesizers will have expansion slots. I told you about this one having the wave expansion cards that you can buy. If I tilt the synthesizer up, I don't know if you can see on the bottom of the instrument there is a little plate here with four Phillips head screws holding it on. That plate, if I were to take it off, which I'm not going to do, we would see memory card slots. And there are 5 of them all together. Roland generously supplied us with the first 3 slots are already full. Those are the XP, A, B, C, and those are full with session, orchestral, and techno collection cards. If we didn't like those, we could pull them out and put new cards in there. And then we also have 2 additional slots left over, D and E, where we could purchase, I'm not even sure if they're still on sale, but at the time the instrument was new, you could purchase additional sound cards on what's called ROM, or read-only memory cards. All right, this is a different kind of memory card. We could stick in a card that was probably would be a RAM card, maybe ROM as well. ROM would mean there were patches already loaded on it that we could stick in here and access those from the front panel of the instrument to get additional sounds. A RAM card would be where we could plug this in and store some sounds from the user bank, move them to this card location, giving us more than the user patches that are currently available on the instrument. Contemporary synthesizers, some of them have cards like this, but they tend to use the same sort of memory cards that you might find in a digital camera. All right, just to the right of that, as we're looking at it, that is, we see the 3 MIDI connectors, which is typical for synthesizers. Most synthesizers will have 3 MIDI connectors. Now, MIDI keyboard controllers, we'll talk about the difference between a keyboard synth and a keyboard controller in a later lesson. But MIDI keyboard controllers often will just have MIDI outs, or maybe an out and a through. But a MIDI synthesizer will typically have a MIDI in, MIDI out, and MIDI through. All right, and this really shows the age of this synthesizer. This is a computer connector. That connector that I'm pointing to right now is what was known as a serial port. Serial with an S, not like Cheerios with a C. S-E-R-I-A-L. And that was the type of connector we used back in the day to connect printers and modems and things like that to our computers. So when this was new, you could plug in a serial cable, plug this directly into a computer, and then it has a little switch where you can select either a Mac computer, 2 different types of PC computers, or MIDI. The reason I'm pointing this out is twofold. One, a newer synthesizer will probably have a USB connector right there in place of that. Very useful. But for us, we will never use this serial connector, but I'm pointing it out because you should notice this little switch. Sometimes students messing around in the lab move this switch and the keyboard will not respond predictably. So what we want to check, if you're running into problems with your synthesizer, it's behaving strangely, not responding to MIDI messages or something like that, check this switch and make sure it's pulled all the way over to the MIDI setting. Moving one group to the right, again, we see 2 pedal connectors. These are pretty typical. There's one marked control, one marked hold. The hold connector on some synthesizers might have a different name. It might be called a damper or a sustain. And that's typically where you plug in a pedal that works like an on-off switch. And you can use that for different things. One of the most basic uses of a hold pedal or a damper pedal is to use it like the damper pedal on a piano. You press it down, the notes hold or sustain, you let go with your foot, and the notes cut off. But you can use it for other things. It uses what's called a momentary on-off switch. So depending on how programmable the synthesizer is, you might use that to sustain or not. You could also use it for turning on or off a preset vibrato. Or you could use it on some synthesizers to move forward to the next patch, kind of like we did with the increment and decrement buttons on the front panel of the instrument. All right, but all of those have to be set up. Those different functions have to be set up in the synthesizer. Typically, if you don't set anything up, it will work just like a sustain pedal on a piano. The control pedal is sometimes called an expression pedal. And expression pedals look like guitar volume pedals, or like a swell pedal on an organ, or a gas pedal on your car. Except unlike your car, when you let go, the pedal springs up in your car. A volume pedal will let you push it down halfway and take your foot off, and it'll stay at that level. Push it all the way to the floor, it'll stay at that level until you move it. So that's what a control or expression pedal will do. It's typically used to control the volume of the instrument, but if you're a creative synth programmer, you can work these knobs on the front panel and change the function of that control or expression pedal. Use it to add varying levels of vibrato, a little bit or a lot. Or you could even use it to bend pitch if you want, or control the rate of portamento, the sliding from one note to another. Lots of things you can do with an expression pedal. Move one more group to the right, and these are the audio output connectors. There's a stereo headphone jack and left and right outputs. If you're hooking the synthesizer up to a stereo amplifier, then you would plug in both of these. The left to the left channel, the right to the right channel. If you have an amplifier that is not stereo, you should plug in only the left jack and leave the right jack unplugged. It's even marked there to tell you. It says L mono. That means if you're using a mono setup, only plug in this jack. If you're using a stereo setup, plug them both in. With either setup, stereo or mono, the headphone jack will always be active on these instruments. Okay, that's it for the back panel or rear panel of the Roland XP30. Thanks.